The hospital's automatic doors wheezed open, and Isabella Morty stumbled into the light, her hand clutching a swollen pregnant belly and her white designer coat soaked in a spreading crimson stain. She collapsed before she could reach the desk, but as the nurse grabbed her phone, she didn't scroll for the city's high-profile district attorney. The emergency contact didn't say husband. It said Dominic. Within 10 minutes, the city's most ruthless mafia boss took over everything. The storm over the city that night was a brutal, unforgiving force, sheets of freezing rain hammering against the reinforced glass of the medical center. Inside the ER, it had been a quiet Tuesday until 11:42 p.m. The sliding doors stuttered open, admitting a gust of ice-cold wind and a woman who looked like she was already half ghost. Isabella Morty was barefoot, her clothes ruined and her face a map of fresh, violent bruising. But the rain wasn't what had turned her white coat dark. It was the brutal artwork of closed fists. As she reached blindly for the triage desk, her strength finally failed. "Save him," she whispered, her voice a shattered rasp. As the medical team erupted into organized chaos, a different kind of storm was arriving at the curb. The roar of black SUVs jumping the sidewalk signaled that the city's most feared shadow had arrived to reclaim what was his. The nurses had seen victims of domestic horror before, but they had never seen a woman whose protection was the very man they had been taught to fear since childhood. Isabella was no longer under the protection of the law, she was under the protection of the Russo Empire. The wail of sirens outside St. Jude's Medical Center was suddenly smothered by the synchronized screech of high-performance tires. 3 black Cadillac Escalades didn't just pull up, they jumped the curb, swerving into the ambulance bay with the predatory intent of a strike team. Richard Blaine, the night shift administrator, watched from the lobby glass, his lungs suddenly feeling too small for the air they held. The heavy doors hissed open, admitting a gust of freezing Chicago rain and 6 men in tailored dark suits who moved with military precision. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't have to. The silhouettes of heavy holsters beneath their jackets and the cold, flat glass of their expressions told the triage staff exactly what they were. Within seconds, the lobby was a fortress. Outgoing exits were blocked, incoming walk-ins were turned away with a firm hand, and the buzzing energy of the ER was replaced by a suffocating, lethal silence. Then Dominic Russo stepped through the threshold. He didn't look like a man who had rushed, yet he radiated a vibration so violent the floor seemed to tremble beneath his Italian leather shoes. His charcoal jacket was dry, his neck tattoos dark against the stark white of his collar, and his eyes, as black and cold as obsidian, scanned the room like a god looking for something to destroy. "Where is she?" Dominic's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that demanded immediate obedience. Richard Blaine scrambled forward, his clipboard shaking so hard the papers rattled. "Mr. Russo, sir. We weren't expecting you. You aren't listed as family. The district attorney is." In 2 strides, Dominic closed the distance, his hands shooting out to bunch the lapels of Richard's coat. He hoisted the administrator an inch off the linoleum, his knuckles bone white. While Dominic's face remained a mask of perfectly intact composure, his eyes betrayed a terrifying, predatory panic. "I am the only family she has tonight," Dominic whispered, the words carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Now take me to her, or I'll have my men dismantle this hospital brick by brick to find her myself." Behind him, Leo Costello signaled the team. The hallway was cleared of civilians, the air turning thick with the scent of antiseptic and the dark cedar cologne of Syndicate men standing guard at every corridor. Dominic dropped the administrator, his jaw clenching so hard it ached. He didn't care about hospital protocol or political optics. Somewhere behind those double doors, Isabella was bleeding, and the beast inside him was already rattling against its cage. The air in the trauma bay was a frantic symphony of beeping monitors and the sharp snap of latex gloves. Dr. Boyd stepped back as the nursing team stripped away Isabella's soaked designer coat, but the movement stopped the entire medical team in their tracks. Under the harsh, unforgiving surgical lights, the truth of her accident was laid bare. This wasn't the result of a fall or a car crash. The bruising on her jaw and the deep laceration above her brow were the distinct, brutal artwork of closed fists. She had one arm wrapped protectively around her swollen belly, a silent testament to the life she was trying to shield even as her own vitals began to crater. Her skin was the color of ash, her heart rate was climbing to a dangerous 140, and the monitors screamed that she was hemorrhaging from a partial placental abruption. Outside in the hallway, the world had gone deathly silent. Dominic sat rigidly on a plastic waiting room chair, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles were bone white. A smear of Isabella's blood stained his left cuff, a crimson brand transferred when a nurse had rushed past him with her belongings. He stared at the stain, the beast inside him roaring at the cage of his composure. As he waited, the clinical scent of the hospital faded, replaced by the memory of a rainy alleyway 6 months ago. He had found her there, shivering behind a charity gala after her golden boy, husband Arthur, had backhanded her for embarrassing him in front of the mayor. Dominic, whose syndicate was the very target of Arthur's task force, should have used her as leverage to destroy the DA's career. Instead, he had looked into her defiant green eyes and felt a fierce, predatory protectiveness lock into place. In the months that followed, their secret sanctuary was built on burner phones and whispered conversations in library alcoves. He had become her only shield against Arthur's alcohol-fueled rages. He remembered the day she told him the truth that would change everything. Arthur was sterile, a closely guarded secret that the public would never know. The child she was carrying wasn't the district attorney's legacy, it was the Mafia boss. Dominic's jaw clenched until it ached as he realized that the respectable world had nearly snuffed out the only light he had ever truly claimed. "Boss," Leo Costello whispered, breaking the suffocating silence of the corridor. He approached with a sleek tablet held in his steady hands, the blue light of the screen reflecting in Dominic's obsidian eyes. "I pulled the street cameras near the townhouse. It wasn't a random mugging." Dominic stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and deadly. "Show me." The footage was grainy, shot through the relentless Chicago rain, but the betrayal was unmistakable. An unmarked van pulled up to the back gate of the Morty estate, and 2 men stepped out. They weren't wearing masks. Dominic recognized them instantly, known enforcers for the Irish mob, the O'Connors, his bitterest rivals. But it was the next sequence that made Dominic's blood run ice cold. The back door of the townhouse opened, and Arthur Morty stood there in a silk robe. He didn't look afraid. He looked like a man concluding a transaction. He spoke to the hitmen, stepped aside, and calmly let them into his home. 5 minutes later, the enforcers dragged a struggling, bleeding Isabella out the back door. She fought like a wild cat, breaking free and disappearing into the dark, rainy streets while the men, perhaps spooked by a distant siren, retreated to their van. "Arthur has been burying gambling debts," Leo explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. Millions of dollars owed to the O'Connors. The DA's office was about to seize their shipping containers, so Arthur made a trade. He gave them Isabella in exchange for wiping his debt and saving his own skin. A suffocating silence descended on the room. Dominic didn't shout. He didn't break anything. The reaction was far worse. The last traces of humanity drained from his face, leaving behind the cold, calculating apex predator that ruled the city's underworld. "Leo," Dominic's voice was a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Find Arthur Morty. Do not kill him. Bring him to the meat-packing facility on the south side. I want him breathing when I get there." He looked back at the screen at the image of the man who had sold his child's mother like a piece of livestock. "And the O'Connors. Tonight, we wipe them from the map. Every lieutenant, every soldier. I want the streets running red by dawn." The Southside meatpacking facility was a cavernous tomb of stainless steel and frost. The air inside the main processing floor was kept at a biting 36 degrees F, smelling faintly of bleach, old copper, and the undeniable chill of the grave. Arthur Morty, the golden boy politician, was shivering violently. He was strapped to a heavy steel chair bolted to the concrete floor, still wearing his monogrammed silk robe, though it was now soaked with freezing water. His pristine image and confident political sneer had completely dissolved into hyperventilation as his eyes darted wildly through the shadows. When the heavy metal doors ground open, the man who stepped into the dim overhead light was not a rival enforcer, but Dominic Russo. Arthur's breath hitched. His entire career had been built on promising to dismantle the Russo Syndicate, but seeing Dominic in the flesh, radiating a lethal, suffocating calm, was entirely different from staring at a mugshot on a task force board. Dominic walked slowly, his heavy Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the concrete until he stopped 5 feet from Arthur. He didn't carry a weapon. The sheer gravity of his presence made the freezing room feel impossibly small. "Russo," Arthur gasped, trying to summon a shred of his courtroom bravado. "What is the meaning of this? You're kidnapping a sitting official. The FBI will tear this city apart. Whatever the O'Connors promised you, I can double it." "Quiet," Dominic said. It wasn't a shout, but it hit Arthur like a physical blow. Leo Costello stepped out of the shadows, setting a sleek black briefcase on a stainless steel table. "I don't care about your deals, Arthur," Dominic spoke, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "And I don't care about the O'Connors. In fact, by the time the sun rises, the O'Connor Syndicate will be nothing but a memory. There will be no Irish mob left to collect your gambling debts." Arthur's eyes widened in terror, a desperate laugh bubbling up from his chest as he realized the connection. "Oh God, it's you. You're the one. I knew the baby wasn't mine." He sneered, his cowardice turning into a pathetic attempt at justification. "I wasn't going to let her parade a bastard child around while I ran for the Senate. It would have ruined my campaign." Dominic's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around Arthur's throat with calculated, agonizing pressure. "You traded her life," Dominic stated, watching the oxygen leave Arthur's face. "You handed a pregnant woman over to butchers to clear your ledger." He released him abruptly, letting Arthur slump forward, gasping for the freezing air. "I could kill you right now. It would take less than a minute, but death is a release, Arthur, and I do not intend to release you." Dominic leaned in, his face inches from Arthur's, the cold from the room seemingly radiating from his very skin. "You've spent your career talking about the criminal element, Arthur. Tonight, I'm going to make you the face of it." On the steel table, Leo began arranging items with the clinical precision of a surgeon. There was a burner phone recovered from the O'Connor hitmen, a high-caliber pistol used in a dozen unsolved syndicate murders, and a stack of ledger pages detailing kickbacks and offshore accounts, all forged with Arthur's signature. "You didn't just sell your wife," Dominic whispered. "You orchestrated a coup. You were the silent partner the Irish needed to move against me. When the deal went south, you cleaned house." Arthur's eyes bulged. "No one will believe that. I'm the district attorney." "The police are currently finding the O'Connor lieutenants dead in a warehouse across town," Dominic countered, his voice a low, terrifying hum. "And they are finding your fingerprints on the shell casings. They are finding the wire transfers from their accounts to yours. By dawn, the narrative won't be about a missing wife. It will be about a corrupt politician who tried to become a kingpin and failed." Leo stepped forward, gripping Arthur's trembling hand. With a brutal, efficient force, he pressed the man's sweating fingers onto the cold metal of the murder weapon and the screen of the burner phone. Arthur sobbed, a pathetic, broken sound that echoed off the hanging slabs of beef around them. Every touch was a nail in his coffin, every smudge of oil and skin sealed a sentence he would never escape. "I'm not just taking your freedom, Arthur. I'm taking your name," Dominic said, straightening his coat. "The world will remember you as a monster, a traitor who sold out his city and his family. You'll be sent to a maximum security cell filled with men you put away. They've been waiting a long time for a friend like you." Dominic turned toward the exit, his shadow stretching long across the frost-covered floor. "Make sure the anonymous tip reaches the feds in 20 minutes, he commanded Leo. As the heavy metal doors began to groan shut, Dominic looked back one last time at the shivering, ruined man in the silk robe. "Isabella is dead to you. She is a ghost, and the man she once knew is a ghost too. From this moment on, you don't exist." The doors slammed shut with a final, echoing thud, leaving Arthur Morty alone in the dark, framed by a reality he could no longer control. Dominic stepped out into the Chicago rain, his mind already shifting back to the hospital, leaving the filth of the past behind to protect the future waiting in the trauma bay. The scent of clinical lavender and ozone was the first thing to greet Isabella as she drifted back to consciousness. Her body felt heavy, anchored to the bed by a dull, throbbing ache, but when she shifted her hand, she felt the unmistakable firm curve of her stomach. The rhythmic, reassuring thump-thump of a fetal monitor filled the room, a heartbeat that wasn't hers, steady and defiant. She opened her eyes to a room bathed in the soft, amber glow of a sunset she hadn't expected to see. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the Chicago skyline, was Dominic. He looked different without the armor of his suit jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the intricate ink that climbed his forearms, and his shoulders, usually set in a line of iron, were slumped with a rare, heavy exhaustion. "You're awake," he murmured, sensing her movement before she even spoke. He was at her side in an instant, his large hand hovering over hers before gently settling on the bridge of her knuckles. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice sounding like crushed glass. Dominic's expression didn't flicker, but his eyes darkened to the color of a stormy sea. "Arthur Morty no longer exists. The man the world thought was a saint is currently being processed in a federal holding cell. By morning, every headline in this country will name him a traitor, a murderer, and a thief. He will never touch you again. He will never even see the sun again." Isabella looked at the IV line in her arm, then back at the man the city called a monster. For years she had lived in the light, playing the part of the perfect political wife while her husband systematically broke her spirit in the dark. She had sought safety and respectability, only to find a predator. Now, the man who lived in the shadows, the man she had been told to fear above all others, was the only reason she and her child were still breathing. "The police, the hospital," she began, her mind racing. "You are a ghost to them, Isabella," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive vibration. "The DA's wife disappeared in the chaos of a syndicate war. You are under my protection now. My name, my resources, my life, they are all yours. You don't have to shrink anymore." Isabella reached out, her fingers tracing the jagged line of a tattoo on his wrist. The fear that had defined her existence for 3 years began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, sharpening clarity. The light had tried to bury her. The shadow had brought her home. "I don't want to just be protected, Dominic," she said, her gaze locking onto his with a newfound, lethal intensity. "I want to make sure no one ever dares to look at me as a victim again." Dominic's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile of pride. "Then let's build an empire they'll be too afraid to touch." 14 months later, the scent of antiseptic had been replaced by the expensive aroma of aged mahogany and Italian espresso. Isabella sat behind a desk of carved obsidian in the Russo estate's west wing, the soft light of the morning sun catching the gold band on her finger. Beside her, in a silk-lined bassinet, little Matteo slept with the same peaceful defiance his father possessed. Isabella was no longer the half-ghost who had stumbled into the ER. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, sharp bun, and her eyes, once clouded with the haze of survival, were now as piercing as a high-frequency blade. She didn't just carry the Russo name, she carried the Syndicate's future. While Dominic handled the iron and the streets, Isabella had taken control of the ledgers. She had discovered that blood was messy, but numbers were absolute, and numbers never lied. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the encrypted accounts of Russo Logistics, the multi-million-dollar shipping front that served as the empire's legitimate heartbeat. Most would see a flourishing company, but Isabella saw a shadow. There was a microscopic discrepancy in the fuel surcharges from the New Jersey port, a phantom leak that had been dripping for nearly a year. She leaned back, her pen tapping a rhythmic, lethal beat against the desk. She didn't need a calculator to realize the scale of the betrayal. Over 14 months, someone had been siphoning small, untraceable increments that now totaled a staggering $3 million. It was a sophisticated theft, buried under layers of shell companies and falsified invoices, the kind of work only a high-ranking insider with intimate knowledge of the Russo infrastructure could pull off. "Found something, matriarch." Dominic's voice was low as he entered the room, leaning down to press a kiss to the crown of her head before checking on their son. He looked at the screen, his jaw tightening as he read the data Isabella had highlighted in crimson. 3 million, Isabella stated, her voice as cool and unyielding as a winter frost. Siphoned through the Atlantic accounts. Whoever did this didn't just steal money, Dominic. They bet on me being too distracted by motherhood to notice the ink bleeding. She closed the laptop with a definitive snap. The passivity of her old life was a distant memory, a skin she had shed in that hospital bed. She didn't feel fear at the prospect of a traitor. She felt a cold, calculating hunger for correction. "I've already traced the digital signature," she said, looking up at her husband with a gaze that matched his own for ruthlessness. "It leads back to Victor Rossi's jurisdiction. He thinks he's playing with a victim. It's time we show him he's dealing with the ledger." The air in the West Wing grew heavy with a tension that surpassed even the most violent nights in the Chicago streets. Leo Costello stood by the mahogany doors, his hand resting habitually near his holster. "Isabella, with all due respect, Victor Rossi is a cornered rat," he warned, his voice low and urgent. "He's a capo with 20 years of blood on his hands. You shouldn't be in the room without the boss or me." Isabella didn't look up from the ledger. She adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse, the movement fluid and dangerously calm. "Dominic isn't the one he robbed, Leo. I am. If I meet him behind a wall of guards, I'm just a wife being protected. If I meet him alone, I am the Russo matriarch." She finally met Leo's eyes, her gaze cold enough to stop a heart. "Leave us, and take the baby to the nursery." When the doors opened 5 minutes later, Victor Rossi walked in with a swagger that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was a man built of scars and arrogance, smelling of expensive tobacco and cheap ambition. He saw Isabella sitting alone, defenseless in his estimation, and his lips curled into a condescending smirk. "Isabella," he purred, leaning over the desk without an invitation. "I was surprised by the summons. I thought you'd be busy with the nursery, not playing with the accounts. If you're confused about the Atlantic numbers, I can explain the complexities of shipping to you. It's a man's headache, really." Isabella didn't flinch. She simply turned the laptop screen toward him. The crimson highlights she had made on the siphoned millions glared back like open wounds. "Complexity is just a word people use when they think they're smarter than the person they're robbing, Victor. You didn't just take 3 million. You took it from the trust fund I set up for my son." The smirk on Victor's face faltered, replaced by a twitch in his jaw. The room felt suddenly colder, the silence stretching until it became a physical weight. He realized then that the woman across from him wasn't the trembling ghost from the hospital. She was the architect of the very trap he had just walked into. "You're a politician's runaway, Isabella," Victor hissed, his voice dropping the facade of respect. "You think because you share Russo's bed, you can talk to a capo like this. You don't have the stomach for what happens next." "I survived a massacre and rewrote the life of a district attorney before I even left my recovery bed," Isabella replied, her voice a steady, lethal hum. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his with predatory focus. "You think you're the most dangerous person in this room, Victor. That's your first mistake. Your second was thinking I'd call my husband to handle a cockroach in my own office." The double doors to the West Wing creaked open, but it wasn't a guard who entered. Dominic Russo stepped into the frame, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. He didn't intervene, he simply leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, watching his wife with a look of dark, profound adoration. He had heard every word of her ice-cold indictment, and for the first time in his life, the city's most feared man felt he was looking at an equal. Victor Rossi turned, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Dominic, thank God. Your wife has lost her mind." "She's accusing me of—" "I heard what she said, Victor," Dominic interrupted, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that promised absolute ruin. He didn't move toward the desk. He stayed exactly where he was, yielding the floor to the woman who had truly earned it. And in this house, the matriarch's word is law. If she says you're a thief, you're a thief. If she says you're done, you're dead. Isabella stood up, the movement slow and regal. She didn't look at Dominic for permission. She looked directly at Victor, who was now trembling. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer the woman who needed a savior. She was the sovereign of the Russo Empire's future. "I won't kill you, Victor," Isabella stated, her voice as sharp and clean as a guillotine. "Death would make you a martyr to your soldiers. Instead, I'm taking everything. Your properties, your offshore accounts, your reputation. By noon, your name will be stripped from every ledger in Chicago. You will be escorted to the city limits with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you ever set foot in this city again, I won't call my husband. I'll handle the disposal myself." Victor opened his mouth to plead, but the words died in his throat as Leo Costello and two enforcers appeared in the doorway behind Dominic. With a sharp nod from Isabella, they seized the broken capo and dragged him from the room. His frantic protests echoed down the marble hallway until the heavy doors muffled them into a final, pathetic silence. The room settled into a quiet, electric peace. Dominic walked toward the desk, his obsidian eyes blazing with pride. He reached out, his thumb tracing the flawless line of Isabella's jaw, the same jaw that had once been bruised by a coward's fist. "You handled that brilliantly," he murmured, his voice thick with a mixture of respect and desire. "I'm done shrinking, Dominic," she replied, leaning into his touch while her other hand rested on the ledger of their empire. From the nursery next door, a soft, happy squeal from little Matteo broke the tension. They turned toward the sound together, a united front of shadow and steel. They were no longer just a mafia boss and a runaway wife. They were a dynasty, and the city would soon learn that while the light had failed them, they would rule the shadows forever.